welcome to Beyond the Couch OT Stories. I am Wendy, your host, and I have Nancy with us today. Thank you, Nancy, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so your topic. Let's get started. I'm interested to see what you have to talk about today.
All right. Well, for our podcast today, I researched the topic of occupational therapy and visual impairment
Okay.
for children. Yes. So
Do you have a personal history with this? Is that why you chose it, or?
I do not actually.
Okay.
I think because I don't was the reason that I chose it.
Okay.
Because I really knew nothing at all about it and was kind of excited at the idea of maybe working with that population. So I wanted to know more about it.
With adults or with pediatrics?
Either one.
Okay.
Either one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great population to work with, and you can actually be certified in low vision, which is a great option to, and it's relatively inexpensive certification that you can get. So just something to think about and kind of put in the back of your brain about, when you're done and graduated with school and passed your board exam. So just kind of keep that in your brain.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I will. Yes. I didn't realize that. I didn't know it was a certain certification. Well, what I learned is that visual impairment means an individual's vision can't be corrected to a quote normal level with glasses or contacts or medication or surgery or any kind of visual perception exercises. And that nearly 2/3 of children with visual impairment have other conditions like intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, hearing loss, epilepsy, and that children with a more severe visual impairment are more likely to have additional disabilities than children with a milder visual impairment. And I found that there are 4 types of visual impairment.
Yeah.
There's central vision loss, which means that they may have peripheral vision. So this, of course, makes reading, writing, and facial recognition really difficult.
Yeah.
Which would be very difficult for a kiddo.
Yeah.
Peripheral vision loss is another kind, and that's like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Where you are limited in navigating your environment. You might need to turn your head a lot to gain visual input, and you would, of course, have difficulties following a moving object.
Yeah.
So those are 2 types. A third type is blurry vision, which is kind of like looking through frosted glass.
Oh.
Yeah, so
not good.
that person would have difficulty identifying objects. They could only perceive really vague shapes, and their depth perception and changes in surfaces would be very challenging.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's probably almost worse for an adult because, kids are closer to the ground, so falling might be easier than for an adult. And then the 4th type is visual disorders that follow brain injuries. So this would mean things like this is actually the ability of the brain to
process
visual info.
Because you don't generally see with your eyes. It's through your cranial nerves, through your optic nerve is actually where you see. So you don't actually process through your eyes like most people would think about. But yeah, so that kind of makes sense. I have had a friend of mine whose son had a medical condition. I don't remember what it was called, but basically the gist is that he had vision, but he was going to slowly lose his vision to where he was completely blind. There's legally blind and then there's completely blind, which are 2 separate things, right?
Yes.
And the normal, average, everyday person may not necessarily know that if you're not medical, but, so he was looking, and I think that's really sad to know that at some point your child won't be able to see your face. They won't be able to see their partners. what their partner's face looks like, their eyes, their hair color,
Yeah.
and what does that look like for that individual. And he, I know you had mentioned that they also have comorbidities. He had ID, intellectual disabilities, in addition to that. So not only was he going to be losing his vision, but then he also has intellectual disabilities. And I lost track of them. I'm not sure exactly what happened to them, but they were building a mother-in-law suite where he could live after graduation and all of this other stuff, so that he had a place to live.
Yeah.
But just think about, like, potentially as a
so
child, and I think as a child, right, you don't know any differently, but us adults and as parents, we know, like, what does that mean? What does that look like?
What they're missing out on.
Yeah, what they're missing out on. And I think he was in high school, like, when they found this out. I can't even imagine knowing that, like, my child would be blind, completely blind. What that would do to me mentally.
Oh, I know. I can't imagine either.
Yeah.
That would be so hard.
It'd be horrible.
And to know that it's going to just deteriorate.
Yeah, and go to nothing. Yeah. For sure.
Yes. Yeah. Let me just check that last. Yeah. So I got, the one other thing I didn't mention about visual disorders that happen because of a brain injury. It could be, so it means the ability of the brain to analyze visual info is impaired, or it could be damage to the visual cortex itself. And I did read that the name of the condition and the way that visual impairment has been thought about medically for a long time is changing, because I guess for the longest time we thought that when someone can't see as a result of an injury, it was literally damage to the visual cortex or the occipital lobe. But now they know, like, you could have damage to a lot of other pathways to the brain that will affect your vision. So it was called, like, visual cortex impairment, and that's been changed to visual cerebral impairment, because it's really
the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. So
that's interesting for sure.
Yeah, like everything else, we keep learning new stuff.
I know. Yeah, it's a never-ending process. That's why we're evidence-based, right?
That's
constantly changing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
okay. So I've got some interventions.
Perfect.
Some ideas for interventions that I sort of grouped by type.
Okay.
Starting with the most obvious, sensory.
Okay.
Because our vision is one of our senses. When that is impaired or gone, the other senses become extremely important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
when you lose one aspect, they say that, let's see, what is it? You have an individual who is in an accident, right? And then they, let's say they lose their vision, then their smell and all of this other stuff, their proprioception, all of this other stuff gets increased.
Yes.
And so that's why they can, like, tell when somebody's in the room, because their hearing becomes more pronounced and
that's right.
stuff like that. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to study that, to be honest with you. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and we as occupational therapy practitioners can help guide that sort of hyper development of their other senses in really productive and strategic ways that are going to serve them really well. Like, for instance, when there's vision loss, they, of course, that impacts their ability to visually scan and to track objects. And so there are games like puzzles or like tracing, where you're getting into our sense of touch, of course, the tactile integration, where you can be you can help them to follow moving objects to improve their tracking or their scanning. And you can have them practice activities that encourage locating and identifying objects in like a crowded environment.
Yeah, that's definitely challenging for sure.
Yeah, when there's a lot of clutter
Mhm.
or lots of things to see.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to discern if they're impaired, if they have some vision, it can be harder for them to discern.
Yeah, for
Or
sure.
that child with blurry vision.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think, even myself, as a individual who's recently been involved in an automobile accident, just even being in environments, and I just have a concussion. Being in those sensory environments, it's definitely hindered my ability to engage with my environment because it's just so much. Noise-wise, visually, just everything. It's just it's a lot.
Stimulating. Yeah.
Yep.
Sensory overload.
Sensory overload. That's right. Absolutely.
That's right,
So-
Professor Fletcher.
That's right. Yeah, she would.
Snuck
Professor.
in.
Yep. Dee is here, so she is that little voice that you heard in the background there. She wanted to get on of this topic. It was so important and so riveting, Nancy, that you're bringing this to our attention.
I
So,
love it.
Yes, absolutely. So sorry. Okay, go ahead.
No worries. Okay, so along the lines of sensory, we also have that tactile integration that I mentioned and auditory integration. So this would look like encouraging reliance on touch and sound for tasks like identifying objects with different textures,
Okay.
or listening for cues, especially if you are helping a child to listen for cues to help them locate things. Like if you're in a home setting, the
Mhm.
beep of the microwave, or how different appliances will have their own distinct sound,
Yeah.
and helping the child to discern that's this and that's that. And it also can help them to locate it, and even guiding them to learn how to discern when they do hear a sound, how far or how close it is to them.
Okay.
Because that then, as they get older and are gaining more independence, that's going to help them with safety
Yeah.
issues. Like, I mean, you can think of the most extreme example would be like crossing the street. You've got to be able to hear traffic and know how close. If you can't see, even when you can see, it's
Yeah.
so important
Oh, yeah.
to listen, not just look, but listen to traffic
Uh-huh.
noises, and to not only be able to hear it, but how far, how close is it?
So in thinking about what you just said,
Yes.
how would you, as an OTA, how would you help facilitate those, focus on those types of interventions?
Well, in the home setting, you could do all kinds of things with what they've got and all. I mean, I would probably first ask the child and ask their family early on when meeting with them, help me identify what are the sounds you hear around your home, and let's identify them. And then once we've established that, you could practice, like, you could have them experience practicing like what that sound sounds like from the furthest reaches of their home. Let's go to wherever that is. And what does that sound like versus coming closer to it? And so just getting used to just developing that discernment. The depth perception of sound. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
That sounds good.
And then in a school setting, one of the other places you'd see a child, you can kind of do the same thing, although there's going to be a lot more noise clutter and that sort of thing. So that could be way more challenging in a good way or in a really tough way, just depending on if they're inside a regular classroom or not. So yeah, just learning that depth perception of sounds, I think.
So, and going back to, right, in the school systems, we can only bill for stuff that help them be independent in the classroom. So in thinking about that, how can we incorporate what you just talked about into that setting?
to help them be more independent.
Yeah, to help them be more independent in the school system.
Well, yeah, I guess helping them to, well, and of course this would go well beyond auditory cues.
Yeah.
Teaching them to rely on tactile cues and auditory cues to navigate their way through the classroom or to navigate their way through the school.
Yeah.
And it would just depend on what their setting is like in the classroom.
Okay.
And then also setting up their workspace as much as you have control over that.
Yeah.
And it would be really easy to do in the home, but even in the classroom, to have frequently used items always in a certain place.
Okay.
So habits and patterns of being able to find these objects or these supplies that are always right here, and having them in convenient locations and always in the same place, if that makes sense, so that they're not having to go look for things all the time.
Well, but so that's a great intervention. However, how do you address that in a setting that you don't have control over, right? School systems, anybody can come in and mess with anything. So how is it that you would address that, since you don't have control over a teacher's classroom, right? You're coming into a teacher's classroom.
Right.
How would you provide those interventions, right? Because we don't want these children to be reaching out and feeling people, right?
Yeah. No, that wouldn't be good.
And that would not be inappropriate. That would be inappropriate. But so, how do you think of what would an intervention look like in thinking that way about things?
Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking of is finding what's important in the classroom that they're going to be in. And I guess the days of having a desk with all your stuff in it are probably gone.
Yeah,
it's
probably.
More, if anything, it's more a cubby. But if they have some personal space that's always theirs, a desk or a cubby, having that arranged a certain way that they prefer, having the child lead that, and so that's something that they can rely on. And talking about the spaces that they don't have any control over, then an intervention would need to address becoming familiar with those areas in their school.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's just figuring out with the child, okay, what is it that you need for, depending on the age, what is it that you're going to need for when everyone sits down to practice their writing? What do you need for that? Where is that located in the classroom, and how can we find that? And maybe creating tactile strategies, again, depending on their level of impairment too, to find those places. So whether it's identified with something that's got some textured, raised, almost braille-like, or textured, and you can do this in the home too, labels, or think like tape or something that's marking these areas in the classroom for the child. So even if it's not something that's in their personal space that nobody else touches, they'll know how to find those areas of the community space to locate what they need. And then similarly mapping where they're stationed during their classroom, so their seat, mapping from their seat to where that supply is that they need, that it's time for this, we're going to go, so-and-so's got to go to this space in the classroom to get all the materials, and that child will know where to go for that.
And I guess that would work in particular settings where I guess they would be or totally blind or legally blind, or both. I guess maybe
both.
I was thinking of a visually impaired school. I was thinking of a visually impaired school. So definitely would want to explore how they set up their classrooms if they allow you to come,
Yeah.
just to see
I
that
think
you
that
have
would be a great
you have a
idea.
student who's in like general education at a public school in
Mhm.
this area,
Mhm.
and you want them to be as independent as possible. I need suggestions. I need some guidance, please,
Yeah.
because I honestly don't know
That's a
what
good idea.
direction to go. So
Yes.
that's the only thing I can think of
Yeah.
as I'm listening. And then another thing I was thinking, but then I have to be aware of those with sensitivities,
Mhm.
a certain aroma. Like maybe
Yeah.
if you have the aroma of lavender, they know that this is the community garden, or this is
Oh,
where
that's
they're
a
going to
great
go
idea.
to the art classroom and
I
things
love that
like
because
that.
nothing I looked up had mentioned anything about smells, and that. But
Yeah, that's a great
huge.
idea.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is a great
So
idea.
just something, trying to think outside of our lovely box and things like that.
Yeah.
And we know what comes with the lavender smell, like relaxation and things
Yes.
like that. So if you think about this person who's hypersensitivity to all this, like you say, environmental clutter,
Right.
just to have that aroma of
Mhm.
lavender telling them to calm
Yes.
down
Yes. I
and
love that.
navigate that. So
I
Yeah.
love it. I
That's
love
a great
it.
idea.
Yeah, see, it takes a room full of OTs to figure this stuff out sometimes.
Yeah, that's one thing I do know. I have a lot of other stuff on here, but I have nothing about the sense of smell, which
Oh, wow.
would be
Yeah.
heightened. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
great.
See, I wouldn't even have thought of that, to be
No.
honest with you. Yeah, I mean, we talked about a little bit about how your other senses are heightened. I
Mhm.
didn't even think about smelling. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess, that could go for like, the cafeteria. They could know where the cafeteria is, the
Exactly.
art room,
restroom.
smell.
Unfortunately, we all
Let's
know where
hope
that is.
not.
right. That's
Yes,
correct.
the cafeteria. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yeah, I think that would be good.
And I love that idea of if it is a child in a regular classroom, then going to a school as the OTP, going to a school for the visually impaired, seeing what they do, and incorporating that as much as possible into the.
I don't know
The
if we
regular
have any
classroom.
of those in our. I know we have. There's a deaf school in Denton, but
Yeah, there used to be one near downtown. Normally in
downtown Dallas.
Mm.
there is a facility. It's changed name, but it used to be Dallas Lighthouse for the Blind.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so we would normally go on a field trip there to
Ah.
visit the environment, and those are individual visual impairments who are working on different equipment that people use daily, such as what is those things called? The little, I don't know, construction workers wear those little jackets,
Vest?
the vest,
Oh,
the bright
yeah.
colored vest.
Yeah.
So they sew those on there, and then they do our degree, the diploma thing that holds our degrees.
Yes.
They sew that as well, and then they do something with the military as well.
Oh.
So it's just kind of giving us an experience of how they operate those machines. There's braille, there's different sounds that they
Yeah.
listen to, and they also have a different aroma that comes out of each
yeah.
machine and things like that.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
interesting.
but and I believe the one that was in downtown Dallas.
I think there's one in Fort Worth too.
It's shifted to
Oh.
a larger facility. And why do I want to keep saying, what's the one person that everybody knows who's visually?
Helen Keller.
Helen
Oh,
Keller.
yeah.
I believe that's the name of
Ah,
the
That would
the
make
school.
sense.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So we definitely would need some more research with that part.
Yes, that is another thing I didn't think of when I was doing my research. It's just looking at what schools there are that are devoted. I kept thinking of in the main public classroom, mainstream classroom, but yeah. Okay, so I had some other kinds of interventions thinking about motor skill development, if there's any need for intervention there for a child with visual impairment, fine motor skills, if they're needing to be developed, could be, again, depending on their level of impairment, could be as simple as threading beads, using tweezers, manipulating small objects with adaptive tools, or providing tactile guides for writing.
Mhm.
So raised, like writing paper that has the lines on the paper are
Yeah.
raised, so they could feel where their boundaries
But
are.
okay, so let's think about this. So they are blind. Are they going to be writing?
Well, maybe they're not writing, but teaching them to form, I mean, being able to put pencil to paper or some kind of writing utensil to paper, I would think is useful and would be something that just because they're blind, you wouldn't want to ignore that whole activity.
Okay.
And so apparently there is that kind of paper that can help, or maybe if a child has a slight visual impairment, or a mild visual impairment, then that's where that comes in.
Okay.
If you're completely blind, no, maybe you're not writing.
Yeah.
And then for gross motor, activities that improve balance and orientation.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, an obstacle course that has tactile or auditory guidance or olfactory guidance to help them navigate the obstacle course, and just practicing what it's like to do that for that child. And then I've listed some, thought about some compensatory strategies.
Okay.
So familiarizing the child with their environment, which we've kind of already talked about, in the home or in the school, recalling where furniture is so that they can navigate through their environment safely. And actually, you asked me if I knew anyone. I'm thinking about my elderly grandmother who is long gone, but years ago when she was alive, she lived to 101.
Wow.
Independently, yes.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
And she had a little apartment that she was not blind, but she was heavily visually impaired by that point. And she would navigate her way through there by kind of feeling the furniture, as you would imagine. So, there's that. Keeping frequently used items within reach makes sense. And that just allows them, it just gives them a level of independence with daily activities.
Yeah.
And then adapting the environment, also we sort of touched on that. Just reviewing a child's home and school environment to make recommendations to enable increased participation and safety. And that can include major or minor assistive technology or home modifications, like high contrast, again, depending on their level of impairment, high contrast colors or black and white to be able to see, reflective lines, or depending on age, some sort of textured lines that help them to know when there's a change in level or surface that their feet are on.
Yeah, I definitely do that a lot when for my older adults, when I'm treating my individuals who have low vision.
Yes.
We definitely work on that. They also have the raised bumps that you can put like on microwaves, on stoves, and that kind of stuff. I actually attended a low vision continuing education, which is very helpful in understanding all of the devices, adaptive equipments, and compensatory strategies that you can learn to help individuals out there.
That appeals to me because I keep saying how I'd like to work with the elderly, and so that would be very helpful. All of this would be helpful. As a certification or continuing ed.
Yeah. It was very interesting for sure.
Yeah, and then when you have some level of impairment but not total blindness, lighting is important. Optimizing lighting. I mean, I have no visual impairment and I struggle in this dark classroom sometimes just because, we have the lights off for the overhead. So I can only imagine how important lighting can be, and not only optimizing it but not creating glares, not creating shadows. So that would take a little bit of trial and error depending on what you've got to work with. And then limiting visual clutter. So for sure in their classroom, if that's possible, if they have a space that's their own, it would apply there. And then definitely in the home setting, that would be important. And then I have very little bit on kind of low tech assistive devices like magnifiers, large print books, and large print, whatever, depending on the age of the person. Electronic aids, so screen readers or text-to-speech apps, or even wearable devices for navigation, which is a little more high-tech.
Yeah, nowadays technology is such our friends in that, like, computers can read to you. They have so many different accessible programs out there now. Smart devices, Alexa, Google's, all of that kind of stuff. You can ask them questions. You can actually have them call people for you. There are just so many different, speaking calculators, speaking watches, speaking, just anything you can think of that are out there nowadays that can help individuals.
Yeah, and I think it's getting better and better with AI. I don't know if you said that. I have this app that for my drive-in and home to school, I have it read snap screenshots of my textbooks that I've taken.
Oh!
And it'll read it to me, and AI is so good now. It just sounds like this very conversational voice. It's not like Alexa. It's actually really good, and they do market it heavily to people with visual impairment. For obvious reasons. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah, and then there's just mentioning the cognitive skills that are kind of layered onto all these other types of interventions. So you have the skill of problem solving that you're addressing when you are training a child to identify barriers in their environment or creating strategies for them to navigate around. There's obviously a cognitive skill that's coming into play there, or practicing sequencing tasks with simple structured steps to help them through a task when they're visually impaired. And then the skills of memory and organization, so teaching the use of visual, tactile, or auditory reminders for routines and tasks and all those sorts of things that we've already talked about. You're improving memory and organization.
Yeah.
And then finally, I just have a mention of social skills. And this is where one of the topics we discuss about, could you do this in a group setting? I think from what I've read, it sounds like for an individual with a visual impairment, a group setting or having them participate in group activities, especially children, is huge. And for visual impairment, it lends itself really well. You can, crafts and children's activities are so adaptable.
100%.
Right? So someone who has a visual impairment can absolutely, through some adapting strategies that an OTP can help with, can participate. And so that they're getting to socialize and they're developing their social skills and not being isolated because of their disability. So I think it's absolutely conducive to group settings with other children with visual impairment or children without visual impairment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that sounds really great.
The only other thing I have is therapeutic use of self, and I
Okay.
sort of viewed that as like working with any client. Just believing, especially the child, just believing that child is whole and perfect.
That's
and
right.
does not need to be fixed.
No,
There's
I
nothing.
love it.
Yeah,
I love
there's
it. Yes.
there's nothing wrong with them. We are just going to
Everybody's
help them.
different.
That's right. Everyone's different. We're going to help develop strategies so that they can participate in their lives fully
That's right.
and as they are.
That's
Just
right.
as they
They're
are.
perfect as they're
Perfect as
meant
they
to
are.
be.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that therapeutic use of self is important with regards to everything.
Yeah.
But 100%, especially when you're reassuring those parents that there's nothing wrong with their children. It's just, things are different for them, and there's nothing wrong with that. And just helping them accept that this is where they are and this is where their children are. I think that when you have children who are born with disabilities, speaking from a parent perspective, you have to grieve and mourn what you felt that life was going to be like with a typical developing child, or at least I did, let me say it that way. And I think a good majority of people feel the same way, that it's not going to be like this, it's going to be like this, and helping them to understand that that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just going to be different than what they anticipated or expected.
Yeah.
I second that.
Yeah.
So,
You know,
yeah.
it's mourning. You have to validate that their feelings. It's okay to have those feelings. It's okay to question and say, why did this happen? And that's okay, and that's normal to have those type of feelings. But, you know, I believe that knowledge is power. And so once you're educated about something, where can we go from here? How can we take this and run with it to, like you said, use ourselves as a tool to help that child be successful?
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is helping that individual and those families.
Yeah.
So.
Instead of worrying, focusing on what might have been. Yeah.
And I think that's really challenging for some people to definitely do, for sure. So,
yeah.
Well, awesome. Okay. Well, I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. That was great.
No, that was really
I learned
good.
a lot.
Yes. Well, I'm excited to know that you're definitely interested in that. We can definitely talk about that.
Okay.
I am extremely excited about low vision. I think it's a great specialty and certification that's really not too expensive to get. And that makes you different than any other OTA that's out there. And that's what at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is about helping people. And that's how you can market yourself, because more people are aging than being born.
Yeah.
You know, because if you think about the baby boomers, you know, they're getting older, whereas us are, there's not as many kids being born these days.
Right.
So it actually makes a lot of sense to work with both populations,
does.
because you've got a job in any arena at that part of time.
It's exciting to me as someone who, early on in my schooling, but I've always thought, I don't think I want to work with kids. This is the first time that I've thought about, I could see myself doing that. So, yeah.
Well,
so
and you could even consider working in one of these schools that we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
Because I would definitely think that would be highly sought after.
Exactly.
So field trip.
Field trip.
Always.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I hope that y'all have liked this episode, and definitely give us feedback as to what other content. We still have quite a few more students that have left to bring topics, and so please let us know what else you want to hear. Thank you. Have a great day.